So real quick, for those of you, if you're new to Agile Blue, Agile Blue is a SOC XDR platform. And what our goal is as a company is to detect cyber attacks to your cloud networks, endpoints before a breach occurs. Our company is a mix of technology and amazing humans, right? So our 24/7 SOC analyst and engineering team is all based in the United States. In fact, they're in the great state of Ohio. We're headquartered in Cleveland, Ohio, but we have a global footprint of where our customers, partners are. And for all of our customers, no matter where you live, your data is in that country of origin, which I know is very important. So again, any questions throughout the presentation, please let us know. So here's really what we're going to talk about today. We're really going to talk a lot about API hacks, which we're starting to see just a tremendous uptick in those. Supply chain attacks that, kind of started with SolarWinds, but are really starting to proliferate throughout the digital enterprise. AI, deepfakes, things like that. Insider threats, which you're starting to see more and more as something that's probably gone away for a little while in terms of a sheer number, but maybe coming back a little bit for a number of reasons. And then just where we see maybe some different types of phishing, where email, of course, that's never going to go away, but maybe different styles of where folks are going. I had this discussion the other day when I was at the FBI, and it was interesting. People think maybe since the Russia-Ukraine war that ransomware attacks have gone down a little bit, or ransomware was kind of fledgling along. I think at the end of the day, ransomware continues to be a huge threat. 2022 was 130% increase over ransomware, which I think is really interesting. That's big. It's not going away. The Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago, maybe some of you saw it, ran an article that said ransomware payments were down 50, 60, maybe even 70% at the start of the year. But what they didn't say in the article, so less people are paying. What they didn't say in the article was that ransomware was still going up. So even though you might not pay, disruption, shutdown, what that did for your supply chain, what that did to your customers is not being tallied. So even though they might not be paying a criminal gang, a ransomware gang for the ransom, they are still facing a major, economic and financial loss to their company because there's so much that goes beyond it. And regardless of payment, whether you pay or not, whether you take the advice of your counsel or the FBI and what to do, regardless, there's still disruption that affects every single business. So I thought that's interesting. And I thought that's interesting to say because some of the articles lately will have you believe ransomware might be curtailing down. It's actually never been stronger. It's less folks are paying. And then you can make a theory as to why less folks are paying, whether it's a financial position on them, whether it's philosophical difference, whether it's a business decision that's been made. There's probably many reasons to go along with it. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys two short videos real quick to get things started. And the whole point to this video is interesting. It's not your normal cyber analysts or things like that. It's from a stock market. It's from the TD Ameritrade. Now, where I think this is interesting is it's interesting to hear where they're seeing activity because they're actually putting money to work. Now, I'm not endorsing any stocks. I am not even telling you to buy a stock. We all know we are in a manic environment right now. The point is just to hear how non-cyber professionals are seeing the market and seeing the trends because they're obviously going to put their money probably into something that would help stop that. So I think this is pretty interesting. A couple of just quick data points on this. I was just told it's not playing on the screen share. So I apologize for that. I will sum up And then when you get this, this recording, I'll put the links in there for you to take a look at. So number one, what they're talking about first and foremost is ransomware is going to continue to go up. So they're looking for ideas and technologies that are going to help across the board. They're looking for ways to monitor and detect ransomware before ransomware takes hold. And they're also talking about how the Russia-Ukraine war is not diminishing cybersecurity like it did in the first stages of the war. But now, because more folks around the country need more revenues, they need money, you're going to see an uptick in all kinds of cyber. The second theme is more of a macroeconomic theme, where businesses, maybe just like your businesses here that are attending this webinar, are seeing vendor sprawl across your cyber providers. You're seeing costs go up, right? So number one, to reduce vendor sprawl, can you look at your cyber vendor and hopefully condense? Maybe they can do 1, 2, 3, 4 things where then you can reduce other vendors. That's going to lead to greater correlation of data, a reduction of management, and hopefully a reduction of budget as it puts you maybe more in the driver's seat. So one of their centralized themes is as cyber escalates, especially into machine learning, AI that we keep hearing about and talking about, ransomware, cloud security, as those become centralized themes, both in our discussion today and in the macro environment, can you reduce vendors to give you more total coverage, but then give you more flexibility in what you're managing? So I think this is interesting. And the last theme is, folks always talk about critical businesses, critical infrastructure. The way I look at it is, of course, there's critical infrastructure in this world, but isn't everybody's business, no matter what you do, whether you sell a widget, whether you're the energy company, whether you're a bank, whether you're a government entity, isn't everybody's business critical, right? To not only them, but every stakeholder. And I think that's a central key theme that more and more folks need to think through. So I'll send you those links as part of, they're in the deck. You'll have those links. Each of them are 1 minute, so not a long time, not a big investment of your time. They're definitely worth listening to because people who are putting big money to work, it's interesting to hear how they look at cyber and where they think those companies that are going to address those specific types of attacks are actually growing. Okay, so first, let's dive into a couple of themes that we see. And again, as I said 2 minutes ago in my preamble, what we're talking about today is what our company, again, we're monitoring and detecting potential cyber events all over the world to hundreds of customers, tens and tens of thousands of devices in just about every industry you can imagine. So we think we have a pretty good picture of what we see. These are things that, again, we're seeing, our partners in threat intelligence are advising, and our partners in the more public areas like the FBI and InfraGard are also seeing across the board. So we think we've got a pretty good perspective here. All right, so supply chain security, right? Let's start with a couple stats. We always got to throw Gartner in there. They give us the doom and gloom, so we got to get that out. 45% rise in supply chain assaults, or in your supply chain. That's a big deal. And when you look at, where things, basically, sometimes you say began, or maybe not began, but the better word is were first recognized, right? Brought to, real exposure with SolarWinds and things like that. But 66% of attacks focusing on suppliers' code. As a company that develops a lot of code, this is a centralized theme, as you can imagine, for Agile Blue, right? For my company, and working with our directors of engineering to totally understand how we can, eliminate and reduce this risk. Because once someone's in the code, whether you're Microsoft, whether you're SolarWinds, or whether you're someone else, that becomes an attack vector that is extraordinarily hard to come back from, especially if you're a small and mid-sized businesses. Microsoft can bounce back pretty quick. They can throw a lot of money and a lot of resources at that problem. Once it's in it's in your code, once it's in an infrastructure environment, that becomes extraordinarily difficult. So supply chain security is very important no matter what type of business you're in, because these days, everybody seems to be a technology company, or at least have technology at the forefront of whatever they do. And that becomes a very large issue for all of us. And if you think about some of these more prevalent issues in 2022, Okta, like how many of us have seen Okta or use Okta as part of our security stack? A lot of people do. We do a lot of integrations with it. But malicious packages have become, an absolute presence in open source. Think about Log4j as well, how that just didn't affect some people or some industries. Literally, Log4j can affect every single company in the world, right? GitHub, a lot of folks, entrust GitHub, with their code and their process of DevOps and all these great things. That's a big hit, right? That's a very big hit. And you look at these packages that, over the course of 2022, you're talking about a number that was 100 times more than it was in 2020. That is an insane amount. When you look at other applications like Magento or WordPress themes like AccessPress, you're talking millions. It had an effect over millions of folks. So supply chain security is really important. Understanding what your supply chain stack looks like is key. Not all companies understand it. There could also be a lot, but it's good to get a very good idea from a discovery perspective, understanding your entire supply chain and what's going into the security around those organizations. Otherwise, you can absolutely be in the crosshairs then. So when you think about supply chain lessons to learn, focusing on things that are public, right? Or public repositories like a GitHub, really focusing on that, talking to your dev team, talking to your technology team to make sure you're in good shape there. Using SecurityScorecard, you're going to see SecurityScorecard, which is a third-party company. We are a partner with them. We integrated them in our platform, but we don't have any financial bearing with SecurityScorecard, of course. It's an excellent source. It's not the only source. It's not the end-all be-all. It's a tremendous source, though, to get more details about how your supply chain, whatever their providers are, how they're taking security, and what their external security posture looks like. And you can use SecurityScorecard. Just go to securityscorecard.com and you can look up companies. It's great. You can also utilize it within the Agile Blue interface as well. Indicators of compromise are not enough. It's really important to know the stem, the root of where these attacks are coming from. And a great way to understand that is to go, more from a reactive security stance into more proactive, into a 24/7 monitoring, detection, and more importantly, response, to understand those potential supply chain risks. Next, let's talk a little bit about API attacks. My goodness. I mean, some of these statistics here, and the source to these statistics got cut off. So these came from SALT. You'll see it in the deck. I don't know why it got cut off in full mode, but I always want to make sure the source of these numbers comes to light. API attacks are getting crazy big. So think about it. 80 to 85% of web traffic is generally being sourced via an API. And I've been in so many meetings with technology people, non-technology people. Everybody talks about APIs. Whether they know what API means is a different story. Everybody's talking about APIs, right? So APIs have become a huge attack vector. When you look at a recent report, a Q4 report by Gartner, the frequency of API attacks has increased by 681%. Now, that's an incredibly high number. Obviously, it's going to grow because APIs, even though they've been around, are just growing and it's a newer type of attack vector. So the numbers are going to be high for some time, but they're big numbers, right? When you look in growth in API call volumes, I mean, they're just absolutely huge, right? Millions and millions, if not billions of API calls. And then a portion of that being what's malicious traffic to those API calls. And it just continues to grow. And by the way, it's going to continue to grow as more and more calls, more and more data is being shipped via APIs. And you're just going to see a steady stream of increase. In the past 12 months, when you look at actual production APIs, in talking to CIOs and CISOs across the board, definitely looking at vulnerabilities, authentication problems, sensitive data exposure, breaches. So when you look at the 31 and 19%, almost 40% of the 50% of the respondents are looking at a potential exposure or breach. I mean, that's a very large number. And when you tie in vulnerability to that becomes, obviously a huge portion, huge majority that's there. So, and then when you look at the increase from Q3 2021 over Q3 2022, and I'm sure you're going to see this as we look at the data going back when we get to Q3 of 2023, the numbers are just going to continue to escalate. So as you think through, as you read through this deck down the road when you get it, have you assessed the APIs in your organization? Do you understand where they're all coming from? Do you understand the counterparties that you're sharing that data with? And what can you do about it, right? When you think about APIs and an API sprawl, for you to do an inventory of who's providing APIs to you or vice versa, that's probably the first step to get a nice map going. 2, what kind of security tools are you using? I mean, a lot of folks are using some obsolete security tools or none at all when it comes to this. And do they really have a way to combat it? And finally, lack of monitoring. APIs, like anything else, there should be monitoring. Whether you're doing that internally, whether you are doing that yourself, that's a really big understanding of that monitoring. And a question came in, is there API attack data from October 22 to now? So basically over Q4. There is some data that's been recently published. Like all data, it generally lags a month, sometimes a quarter, depending on what it's trying to show. So for Q4 2022, Joe, it's a great question. We should start seeing data real soon. And before we get data from a lot of our providers, we'll scrub it. We'll make sure it makes sense, make sure it's truthful, and then we'll get that out to into our customer base. So you'll see us probably start publishing some of that in February. Whether it's in our blog, but we'll make you notified to it, whether that's in one of our newsletters, you'll see it come across. I'd also like to mention, and this is where we do some of our alerting to, our monitoring and detection to, the OWASP API security project. This was launched back in 2019, obviously. And it gave us all maybe a good framework, maybe some rails to really start working with API security in terms of monitoring, detecting, those types of things. So when you look at what we do at Agile Blue, a lot of this is built into what we're already monitoring for our clients, right? So that's a good thing. And it's just a start. Take a look at the source here when you see this OWASP.org, their API security. But there's an OWASP top 10 for application security, application development. There's the same thing for APIs where we're seeing some of these types of things. So this is good to probably prioritize, understand from your own perspective. And obviously, if you're a customer of Agile Blue, understanding we're on top of this, and these are part of the things that we're monitoring for. By the way, and always getting better at these things. You don't start off just being tremendous at everything. You got to grow and continue to evolve because the cyber criminals are. So how to defend against API attacks? Discovery and inventory is number one. You got to know what you got, both inside and outside. Compliance monitoring, understanding where those specifications are and how they align. We talked about threat detection, constantly scanning, constantly understanding. Obviously, if you're working with someone like Agile Blue, you're going to be covered. And threat prevention as well is a really big important. Those countermeasures to understanding where these attacks could be coming from are extraordinarily important. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about something interesting, fun, scary. All these things all wrapped up in one, right? So tons of buzz going around about ChatGPT. I bet you some folks on here played with it as well. It's very cool. I have as well. I just saw a tremendous statistic that I just saw it this morning, and I posted to my LinkedIn. If you haven't seen it, ChatGPT got to 1 million users faster than anything in the history, right? Netflix, Instagram, Snap, TikTok, all these things that I have no idea on. ChatGPT got there in like 5 minutes. It's crazy. It's a fantastic chart to look at, but everybody's assessing it. Everybody's also assessing it to see how they can use it. Our team is, I can tell you it's not a top priority for Q1. They're assessing it, they're understanding it, but there's probably ways Agile Blue as a 24/7 SOC can use ChatGPT to make our processing more efficient and probably faster for our customers when they need to interact with us, right? So we're all probably taking a look at this, and whether any of us implement it into production, who knows, but it is excellent. It is excellent technology, so you can't ignore it. The cyber gangs are definitely not ignoring it, whether they're using ChatGPT or something else, they're generally not ignoring it. And you can look at more sophisticated attacks coming across, and we see this using machine learning. You know, AI is there, but AI is more of a marketing buzzword. It's really machine learning that's taken that next advance. And it's worrisome because as these attacks become so sophisticated and adaptive to what you're doing, and that's the key. You might be doing great things from a security perspective, but the whole point of machine learning is to understand that and know that, and then adapt the criminals' ideas to moving faster away from it, and hopefully not only exploiting those, but obviously becoming better with what they're utilizing. So, you know, this is interesting. I think you're going to see this starting to really take hold, both for the good and the bad in 2023, into some real big use cases and momentum into productize things into 2024. And as to what those are, we'll talk about a few of them here in a second, just to give you guys some early ideas. But I think when it comes to machine learning, when it comes to AI, even when it comes to more heuristics things, like neural level things and things like that. So when you look at your AI, your ML, your NL, all the great acronyms and buzzwords, you know, I think one, education with employees is extraordinarily important. When you have people interacting with chatbots, when you have people getting video messages, which could be deep fakes, when you have people getting audio messages, which can also be fakes, educating employees how to interact with technology continues to be a major thing. It's not just about clicking on an email link anymore. It is much more advanced. And education can never be second guessed. It can't be once a year. Educating your employees is something that just needs to be a continual lesson. Two, implementing stronger authentication protocols. Attackers know how to take advantage of things like this, multi-factor authentication, different types of authentication, password managers. We'll talk about that. But when you look at using machine learning and things like that, again, it can only help. Also adopting a zero trust model, which we'll talk about a little bit. I know it's hard to adopt zero trust. I know it's a big investment as well. When you ensure that least privilege access, you can create an environment where even if there is access, even if there is a potential breach, it does tend to limit and it does tend to mitigate risk. And sometimes in cybersecurity, it might not be about stopping or eliminating, but it could be about mitigating risk, which is even more important sometimes. And that's really important to think about. And again, a centralized theme, not just because this is what Agile Blue does, but monitoring. No matter what people are using in terms of technology, the more monitoring you're doing, and not just endpoints, but your network, your cloud, users, right? Understanding user behavior, monitoring user behavior, user access. This isn't just about malicious user behavior. It can also be just negligence, right? And usually it is negligent and not malicious. But at the end of the day, monitoring everything from behaviors to technology to everything at least gives you the ability to mitigate that risk and not fall victim to something that you might have had been able to get out in front. So let's talk about a couple of fun things. Of course, playing around with ChatGPT, you're probably starting to see these pop all over the place. We can provide more information to you as well in a separate deck that is a little bit more intense, very, very technical. But can ChatGPT make everyone a potential hacker? It's kind of funny. So do you not need to be a techie anymore? Do you not need to be a programmer? Can you just use ChatGPT and have it, it code for you? Here's examples of what some folks have had some success doing in creating some potential hacks, right? Creating a multiple payload for XSS by applying URL encoding, right? And having ChatGPT kind of spit this back to you on how to be utilized. That's pretty interesting. Here's ChatGPT using the ability to decrypt a JWT token. which I find interesting. And some of these researchers who've done this, these aren't criminals who've done this. These are the good guys, the white hat. This is the researchers who have done this and start posting some of their findings back to these blogs. This is really interesting stuff, how you can pose this to ChatGPT and then see what chat comes back with. We'll just call it chat for now, because every time I just try to say ChatGPT, obviously I'm stumbling over my words. But some really interesting things on how they're coming back with it. I'm about to create a payload exploitation using a SQL Server injection. I mean, I think this is very fascinating stuff, because if this could make hackers more efficient, probably more higher base quality, potentially quality, and get them to market, so to speak, faster, obviously this puts us all on the defensive to defend against this, which is going to make things harder for us. So again, companies like Agile Blue and other types of security vendors, we need to up our game when it comes to machine learning and detecting this AI and understanding how to potentially combat it. Here's another really interesting bypass, a two-factor authentication bypass. I thought this was kind of fascinating as well, kind of reading through how this use case came to be and how it could be potentially utilized. Again, on this demo, you're not going to read through all this, but when we send you the deck, you can kind of see how this lays out. You'll see some of the sourcing to it too, so you can go to these types of things. Anyway, we're not going to spend too much time on this. I just wanted you to see how some folks are really playing on. Here's a discovery API endpoint technique using these tools as well. So I think this is fascinating. It covers a lot of the subjects we talked about today. It's just scratching the surface. Unfortunately, these are tools that can be very much exploited by really smart people. Okay, so back to reality now. Even though ChatGPT is reality, let's talk back to some other things that we're actually saying. What about password managers? I have password manager discussions, it seems daily, not just with customers, but maybe even my own children, right? I have high school kids. I try to let them, understand the importance of, well, everything when it comes to a phone. They listen to me this much because, I'm dad, I don't know much. But at the end of the day, they do use a password manager. And we've seen some scary stuff come from password managers over the last couple of years. I mean, LastPass was recently breached. 1Password was a while ago, so was Password State. Dashlane has been great. Keeper's been great. We haven't seen much interaction with them, which is awesome. So the overall question I've been getting is, should we stop using these things? The answer is no. I think password managers are great, but think about no piece of software, nothing can offer 100% security. That's impossible. So the bigger chances you get of using technology to help you not just store and retain passwords, but to create passwords that are very difficult to break. It's impossible to be 100%, but since we've been getting this question a lot, the answer is continue to use password managers. Choose the right one, choose the right ones that are best for you, but we shouldn't stop using them. But take into consideration, it's not the end all be all. And we've seen them breach recently. Unfortunately, a lot of folks use LastPass, and LastPass was the most recent to go down over the last month or so. Okay, going into this discussion, I'm sure you thought you'd be hearing something about zero trust. I mean, I think we all know what zero trust is, but at the end of the day, with zero trust and where it's becoming more and more prevalent every single day of the week is, the network and the workplace of, it shouldn't be the future, it should say now. It's more remote is the norm rather than the exception. Is the world we live in, right? Whether it's was forced by COVID, whether it's just the nature of the business you're in, whether it's the new way everybody's doing business with, days in, days off the office, whatever it might be, zero trust is starting to become essential, critical for enabling that security into networks and systems. And, a lot of folks will talk about, well, hey, these folks are not, using critical assets. They're just logging into 365 and doing some things like that, or into our storage. That doesn't really lessen this, and we do hear this a lot, right? Being able to think about a zero trust policy of application, applying authentication and encryption, across every layer, that is the infrastructure layer into the application layer, into the viewable layer is extraordinarily important. Also, having a comprehensive vulnerability and patch management procedure is critical to these. This is something, we offer we offer vulnerability scanning through our platform now, something we just recently launched. So more and more of our customers are taking advantage of it. Through that, we can help them with the data, and we're seeing bigger gaps growing in terms of their vulnerabilities. It's important to know that and bring it to their attention, of course, but it's interesting to see that really large, small, medium, large companies, critical companies, whatever they are, still having the vulnerabilities that they have on a day-to-day basis. Zero Trust also conditions us to have continuous monitoring, again, across the layers of your state. It's not just a server or network or endpoint. It should go into the application, the API layers, all these different layers. So we understand the vulnerabilities, we understand the access, and we're able to understand those, especially when we're controlling and monitoring all that traffic. People have access to things. Are we monitoring that the people who do have that access are actually taking advantage of that access? Or do we see anomalous behavior in that access? At the end of the day, we know Zero Trust isn't easy. It takes time, it takes process, but it does need to be enforced. And Zero Trust is something that, I think all of us will deal with very, very soon. Right now, it's still growing that we see. Again, another interesting screenshot. Again, the source is on the document. I think the big thing here is granting the least privilege, right? It's not when someone comes in, it's Thunderdome, they just have access to everything. It's really understanding that least privilege indicator. It's being able to monitor whether that privilege is into a document, a folder, a share, wherever it might be, into the cloud, wherever it might be. Whether someone's an admin, whether someone's just a regular user, whatever, are we not only granting that least privilege, are we monitoring that least privileges are not being taken advantage of? Our folks aren't trying to move outside of those. Does that request into those environments continue to happen at too large of a number, or too large volume? Those are things that Zero Trust helps with, and monitoring of it really helps lend I think, excellent perspective as to how it's being utilized. Okay, let's talk about something that's really interesting to me, and something that you're seeing more and more. And I'm keeping an eye on our clock. We don't want to use up your whole hour unless we need to. We want to give you some data, give you some great feedback. Hopefully you take this data, come back with questions. But we don't want to monopolize your entire morning so far. So phishing and ransomware expanding beyond email. Again, a lot of folks think it is strictly happening in email. Of course it is. And we see tons of that every day of the week, and that's never going to go away. But we're seeing attack vectors changing. As you change your way to communicate with your teams, even your customers, whether that's Slack, Microsoft Teams, SMS messaging, Zoom, because Zoom is starting to try to bring in a lot of features, in our opinion, to hopefully, well, you see what they're trying to do. They're trying to not be so reliant on Slack and take some of those communication features into Zoom. And you're starting to see these across the board, right? You're even seeing things, folks communicating in SharePoint more like they used to do in email or Slack. Well, what about also across the board in different types of tools? So not just utilizing SharePoint, but similar types of tools that they might be sharing documents with. Dropbox allows things like that as well. But when you look at the way that criminals are now starting to attack, right, getting into Slack channels or Teams, SMS, you get these links. 2 years ago, I happened to have my phone, my SIM card hijacked, which still is growing tremendously, by the way. But I was expecting a message from Amazon or expecting a delivery. I got a fake Amazon, coincidentally, clicked on it, and my SIM card was hijacked that next morning. But now, instead of just hijacking SIMs, you're starting to see messages getting hijacked. You're starting to see more messages coming through SMS to obviously foster these types of collaborations. More and more services that you use, and we all use multiple services these days, are seeing potential types of phishing to lead into potential ransomware. And again, this comes to education. If people sometimes think if it's not via email, good to go. No, be very wary of everything. And Zoom should be the last thing probably people were expecting on this list. Zoom's on this list, and it's something we see, you're starting to see a lot more of. Let's shift gears into the cloud a little bit. Everybody's business has some type of cloud component to it these days, whether you're cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, there's all these different things, right? Well, when you look at the statistics, almost 80% of security incidents are happening because of misconfigurations. I don't know how many folks in here are administering and setting up and working with AWS or Azure, Google 365, whatever it is, Oracle. No matter where you are, there are so many options, there are so many settings, there are so many configurations. It literally takes specialists in not just cloud, but those specific platforms to know how the tuning needs to be set. And these types of numbers here are just eye-opening, that it's not a breach. It's not somebody hacking in, using brute force or credential theft or whatever it might be. It's actually a configuration that you might have set up your systems with that is misconfigured, is just not the right thing for your type of application. And those types of knowledge, it's an ignorance of these configurations, not because you're malicious or negligent, just because it's an education thing. Like, there's just so many of them. Cloud Security Posture Management, or again, another acronym, CSPM, is going to get really big in 2023. And you're seeing more tools starting to add Cloud Security Posture Management to it, because there's two components to it, right? And you're going to see Agile Blue adding this more and more into our technologies for our clients. Number one, it's understanding, right? It's understanding. So that's a visibility. Do you have a pure visibility into all your cloud assets and those configurations? The answer is you probably don't. And especially as you're hybrid or multi-cloud, going across all kinds of different clouds, going into your on-prem, there's so much visibility that you need to understand where your configurations, where things are aligned, where you could have potential risk. And things are so dynamic, and they're growing dynamic by the day with every new subset, with every new launch, with every upgrade, all these things. It's really important to have continual visibility into that. Number two, it's important to compare your cloud configurations against those industry standards. We like to have those pre-built rules. And the reason that's important is, as these things change, it's dynamic. You're going to have to keep up with it. But more importantly, there are a subset of best practices that you can begin with. And a big thing about CSPM is it's not all just on a human that works for you, and maybe your MSP, a provider. It reduces human error, and allows you to be aligned with the best practices as we see them. And by doing CSPM and that continual visibility, that continual monitoring, it allows us to discover new threats that are appearing across your cloud. And that means real-time anomalies. That real-time anomaly may indicate an actual malicious activity. Real-time anomaly can also be something that's harmless. Absolutely it can, because you're going across different clouds, but it can indicate malicious activity. And that percentage of malicious activity, the faster you move on it, the bigger the chance you have to mitigate that risk. So Cloud Security Posture Management, you're starting to see pop up everywhere. Tools like Agile Blue are starting to add them to their suites. And if you look at our roadmap in 2023, we are adding more and more Cloud Security Posture Management tools for you as the year goes on. Of course, lots of people have questions when it comes to CSPM. So again, if you have questions today or down the road, or maybe what we're specifically adding to Agile Blue in our release in Q2, just let us know. Happy to review that with you. All right. Let's talk about cyber insurance. Wall Street Journal, obviously I read the Wall Street Journal. It's the fourth time I've mentioned it. Had a big article about this in middle of January. More and more insurance companies offering cyber policies aren't just raising rates and raising premiums now. That's the least of our problems, even though that's a big problem. That's the least of our problems. They're starting to deny renewals. And if insurance companies start denying renewals, that's going to put us all in a really tough position, because how many times are you as a business, do you need cyber insurance? How many times do your customers demand of you that you have cyber insurance? And not just customers. This could be if you're a publicly traded company, what's required of you. If you have specific certifications of ISO or NIST or SOC or things like that, what's required of you? Well, the rising threat of ransomware, the rising threat for insurance companies of you not having great cybersecurity plans is putting a dent in what cyber companies will do. So when you think of Lloyd's of London, right? You know, one of the most prestigious and largest insurance companies in the world, they announced that their insurance policies will no longer cover losses from state-sponsored cyber attacks. Now, you think about state-sponsored, and for the majority of companies on this call, is China or North Korea or Iran or Russia, are they coming for you? Maybe, maybe not. But that is a loosely interpreted term, and here's why. There are lots of cyber gangs that are funded by state sponsors. So they have all the tools, they have all the means, but they're not necessarily the state. But they act like a state, and they got what a state has because the state is sponsoring them. And whose determination is going to be that some ransomware gang from Russia or from North Korea, that they're not state sponsored? So, you know, to look at this and understand where you can have exposure, not just Lloyd's of London, because probably so many companies, not so many companies on here use them. But if you don't think this is going to proliferate into everybody's insurance policy with US providers, Canadian providers of insurance, it's coming. And if you find yourself without insurance that's going to cover cyber, you can be put into an indefensible position. The thing to understand, though, is cyber insurance is not a cyber defense program, not at all. It's a component of it. And more insurance companies are asking you to make sure you have 24/7 monitoring. So it's a good thing you're working with Agile Blue. We're here to help. And by the way, the security scorecard, like I mentioned, insurance companies are going to security scorecard. Like you go to Yelp to find out who has the best steakhouse in whatever city you're in. I'm in Cleveland. Who's got the best steakhouse in Cleveland? And you go to Yelp and you find out this restaurant does, this restaurant doesn't. You can go to security scorecard, anyone can, and find out what position your security might be. And if your insurance company potentially uses that, that could be detrimental to you. So understand where you are. Go to cybersecurity or security scorecard as well to understand where you lay out, and talk to your insurance providers. So as we get closer to the end of this presentation, we're going to open up some time for some discussions, but a few more points. One, sectors in the crosshairs. Look, we all are in the crosshairs. I don't care what you do. But some sectors, of course, some critical infrastructure, which again, like my position earlier, we're all critical, right? We're all critical to ourselves, to our customers and stakeholders. So everybody's business is critical. But critical infrastructure sectors, education is tremendously being beat on right now. I'm not saying it started with that Los Angeles City School hack, but man, it seems since then we've just seen a ton of education, whether that's higher ed, secondary ed, K through 12, whatever it might be, just getting absolutely attacked left and right. And then, the S&L in SLED, the state and local governments. Of course, federal is always in the crosshairs, but more state and local we're seeing activity with, more attempts. And I think when you look across the board, these sectors, although this includes just about every sector, but these sectors are really in the crosshairs. The state, local government, and education have really started to even pull ahead of where you see maybe finance and healthcare, although those are always in the crosshairs, really starting to see some of the SLED organizations a huge push into those types of compromises. We talked a little bit about your stakeholders at your organization, and most likely, no matter who's on this call, you have investors, you might be publicly traded, you might be private equity backed, venture backed, and you probably have a board, whether that's advisory or a true fiduciary board. They are now demanding more visibility. And it's not just the fact that they're demanding, tell me what you're doing from a cyber perspective, because a lot of these folks are not technical. They might not understand it. but what they understand is risk mitigation. They understand trends. They understand where they can have a potential issue and where this business could have a huge impact. The more you can show your investors, your boards, that you're doing things, that you're working with folks like Agile Blue, that there's risk scoring going on, there's trends and analysis, there's scoring. They understand scores. Don't be afraid to share this stuff with them. Share them with where you're going, where you've been. This will give them a very good understanding of how you as a professional are thinking about this risk. And more importantly, how you're keeping up with this risk to reduce risk and improve your security posture. So the visibility that investors and boards are looking for, you have, and continue to use that with them because it's only going to help all of us. And our partnership with SecurityScorecard, I've mentioned them a lot, gives you great feedback on what your scoring looks like, gives you feedback on where you might need to improve. But interesting with them, and this is from their most recent analysis, companies with a better security scorecard rating are more resilient. That's not a reflection on security scorecard. That's just showing that security scorecard is at least identifying the companies that have, the position they're in. But the companies that have least amount of cybersecurity have a almost 8 times chance to be breached. That's an incredible number. Security scorecard is just showing you the scores. That's just showing you the more you know, the more visibility you have, you can work. Well, we'll be happy to help you work with you to drive those scores better into the BA category, which is going to reduce that risk that you have. Oops, sorry. All right, that's it. You guys are tired of hearing me talk. That's 50 minutes. No one really wants to hear talk for 50 minutes. So with that, let's pause. Let's see if you guys have any questions. I answered a couple as we were going, but let's see what questions we have out there and we can get them answered today. A question, where can we get the Agile Blue roadmap? Great question. So in this deck we'll forward to you, we will be adding the Agile Blue roadmap to this, and you'll see how we're covering things like advanced machine learning attacks, CSPM, and more auto remediation tools into our SOAR technologies so we can get out ahead of a lot of these attacks. That roadmap will be attached there. Didn't want to go over it on this presentation, really wanted to focus on what we're seeing so everybody understands that, not just talking about roadmap on this. So it's a great question. We will add it to this deck. What other questions can we answer on this? Let's see. So another question that has come in is, can insurance companies use security? So can insurance companies use security scorecard against a company? The answer is we're seeing that, and we're being told this, not just from a company, not just from an insurance company, not just from security scorecard. We are absolutely seeing this, that not just insurance companies, but even potential regulators, even potential compliance framework can come, see where they might have some issues and bring those to your attention. Look, at the end of the day, say those issues are out there, it's better you know them first so you can address that and let them understand you have visibility. There's a potential issue. You're working towards that, or getting out in front of it is even more important. All this data is available to you. I mean, it's there, it's in your dashboard. Our team's happy to work with you on this during our monthly calls with you. It's there for you. Get out ahead of it before your insurance company does. And yeah, the answer is it is scary, because Security Scorecard will even tell you insurance companies are getting ahead of that. Finally, a quick question was also, are we starting to see a bigger uptick across the board in terms of alerts in January of 2022? So we usually publish these numbers. Today's the last day of January. And I can tell you, I look at the numbers all the time, just about daily. We're seeing an absolute increase across the board of all of our customers of increased alerts. Total alerts, false positives, of course, but the true positives as well, going up through the roof. Going into January 2023, I think every cybersecurity company knew we were going to see an uptick coming out of the Russia-Ukraine war, becoming more kinetic, less cyber. Still a lot of cyber, but more kinetic. The economy, as economies tend to get more manic, even go down a little bit, become hazier, of course that crime goes up because these gangs want money and need more money, just like all of us do. But they're hitting it pretty hard, and they're banking on less investment in IT, less investment in cyber. So they think they can take foothold. Those are a couple of reasons that we think the numbers are going up, and we have seen them go up in January. Okay, that seems to be the questions we've had. Great questions. Thank you for those. We will send this deck out with the recording and the roadmap to everybody who signed up, and of course everybody who actually joined. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's tough on a Tuesday morning to do this for an hour, but hopefully you found this interesting. I appreciated putting this data together. I appreciated presenting this to you, and I appreciate everybody spending the time they have. Everybody have a wonderful day, and we look forward to getting you this data a little bit later today. Take care, everyone.